what we're doing. I am, of course, thrilled to be joined by Simon Rosenberg. Simon is a longtime Democratic strategist who turned his attention to building a community of support for candidates, for capacity building, and most importantly, for expanding the base. And that effort is, of course, Hopium, which has grown into a powerful force for exchanging ideas between candidates and a growing base. And it's also been a remarkable new source of funding for candidates who have needed it. Simon, welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Edwin.
Yeah. It's in the work that you've done in the short time that Hopium has been around has been an incredible um, boost, I think, to I know you wanted to get to 55% and you didn't do it. But you can't get there without building the base.
Yeah.
And this has been a really important part of that. And later we'll talk about that. But I think we have to start with violence, and we have to start with the what we know about the uh, Charlie Kirk uh, shooting, what we know, but what it says about us. And I just want, before we do that, I want to say that most Americans, despite the fact that you and I are in this world, most Americans have never heard of Charlie Kirk. Most Americans don't know what he stood for. Most Americans know there's a manhunt, somebody got shot again on the same day as a school shooting. It's incredible how our politics have been pulled in one direction that's not quite relevant to Americans.
Yeah, look, I want to the this is a difficult time for all of us. It's a difficult time for the country. We are have an historically we're in a time of enormous challenge for all of us. And I just want to say a few things to your listeners and the people watching today is that we have to level set here, I think very importantly, that there is on the right an ideology that encourages violence. And in fact, the president has, if we go back to QAnon, which has been embraced by the president of the United States and by many Republicans, at the end state of QAnon was the assassination and killing of Democratic leaders on the Mall and the hanging of people like Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats. It was it had a violent end. And that's why you saw on January 6th, that famous noose. That noose was for Nancy Pelosi. That noose was for Mike Pence. That noose was part of the QAnon story, that at the way that we had to deal with these pedophiles and the people, this incredible craziness of QAnon was mass execution of Democrats, not of leaders. And so there has been inside the new right a sort of normalization of language around the dangers of the far left, of Democrats, of those people, of Trump's opponents, whatever it is. Even going back to Trump gave a speech on July 4th, 2020, in his first term, where he compared the radical left to the Nazis and to the communists and to the jihadis that needed to be killed and eliminated by the American military the way that they had been previously, the Nazis, the communists, the jihadis, putting me and you, Edwin, and our families and our ideological movement on a place where we should be attacked and by the American military. And so there is an incredible body of language and thought and argumentation around encouraging violence on the right against those other people. There is no such ideology on the left. It just doesn't exist. We don't have a radical left movement in America. In fact, our movement is desperately, ferociously fighting to preserve rule of law and democracy, battle illiberalism. Battling illiberalism is the central undertaking of our collective project. And we've seen millions and millions and millions of people this year, tens of millions of people protest legally without any incident. It's incredible how many people have been on the street this year. Yeah. Peacefully, with no incidents of any kind. Right. And so And what are we doing? Channeling our frustration and anger about what's happening to our country. We're getting our candidates elected. We're raising money, right? We're knocking on doors. All
Mhm.
of this is we're channeling our frustrations and worry about the future into democratic action in the way that you do in a democracy. That is not true on their side. And this notion that there's any kind of equivalence between the relationship to political violence on the right and us, as the president said on national television this morning. The president on Fox News, and I am angry about this morning, was given a softball question by the anchor on Fox this morning, saying, we have radical people on the right too, Mr. President. Like, shouldn't we all come together? And he's like, no,
I saw that, Simon.
yeah,
It was appalling.
the right wing violence is justified based on DEI and crime and open borders. And what the president has, and what I've concluded from watching today, is where the president has ended up, or Donald Trump, because I don't like to call him the president because I don't think he acts like an American president, so we shouldn't give him that honorific, is that where this man has ended up in his physical, cognitive, and political decline, the frustration and anger that people are refusing to bend the knee, that that even Putin, his dear buddy, is humiliating him and chewing and throwing him around like a doggy chew toy every day, is that where he's ended up is that he's basically descending into just race war,
Yeah.
right? Like just pure, unadulterated racial hatred, manifestation of just racial hatred against the other, hatred against the ideological opposition that has taken him down. And what he did today is he justified both state-led and vigilante violence against his opponents and against those people in a very direct way. This was not indirect, this was not subtle, and he's inflaming this because he actually wants some kind of sustained confrontation. It's why he's invaded DC, where I live, right? I'm living in an occupied city. It's why he's threatening to go into Chicago, although
We took them out. So,
yeah, so far. But now he's found New Orleans or Memphis,
yeah.
all very black cities, right? Again, all about this sort of subjugation of those people, because if they won't bend the knee willingly, he's going to bend it for them,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Which is where he's ended up. And I think that my message to everyone today is that we should be outraged by this. This is not okay. This is unacceptable for any leader in any democracy to be behaving like this. And I'm just also personally frustrated and tired with the normalization of this kind of language and behavior that has been going on. Donald Trump yesterday openly talked about punching and beating up people on the left, justifying, again, creating justification for political violence in the United States.
Yeah.
He should not be. There should be calls for him to leave office because of this. And so
Well,
I'm angry,
yeah,
Edwin, and
you
I
should.
appreciate we just happened, and we need to be following the news here because I know there's a press conference going on.
Yep.
And if you see anything, let me know here. So
Okay.
thank you for giving me my opening statement here.
No, I think it was great. And look, Simon, that the president isn't just calling. I mean, the the fomenting of political violence on the right, as you point out, is real. But there is political violence on the right. Right? We had a legislator murdered, hunted, murdered in Minnesota. We have
Multiple, by the way, right? This
multiple
was not
hunted.
not just one, but this
Right.
this was a long list. He was working his way down through the list.
Yep.
He shot two more people 7 and 8 times who did
Yep.
not die, fortunately, right? He even killed the friggin' dog and so yeah,
Yeah.
no, this was a,
So I mean, and that isn't alone because we had judges who were being attacked, We had Nancy Pelosi's husband who was attacked, but they went for her. I mean, and what Donald Trump is telling his um his army out there, his private army, is I'll pardon you. I'll
yeah,
pardon you.
right.
I'll pardon you. Do this. There is no consequence on the left, on the right, for political violence. And what I heard the last few days, and just these are my ears, and correct me if I think I'm wrong, but you know, you and I do not condone political violence at all. Charlie Kirk's murder was horrific. Period. And even though you and I have nothing in common with the guy except that we're human beings and we don't shoot each other. Um, um, I think that making politics and speech unsafe for some has now made it unsafe for all. And I think um, that the right, that Donald Trump and his gang never imagined that was possible. They thought they could unleash political violence across America, condone it, pardon it, and somehow it would only hit us. And I think they're afraid, Simon. What
The kid
I've heard in this is fear.
the kid who shot Trump a year ago was a right winger, right? I mean, he wasn't and you remember the same thing happened, right? That we went through this thing where somehow they're blaming trans and,
Yep,
leftists and, they even, and, a year ago when the president was, the attempt to shoot the president or Donald Trump at that time,
yep,
and yes, because people on the right are awash in guns, awash in justification, and what the thing that is should be upsetting to us today is that the president is continuing to create justification for the violence. What he said this morning on Fox News, yes, he's pardoned people, suggesting that if you commit right wing political violence, I'll have your back, which
hmm
was an encouragement of this kind of activity. But what he said this morning was that the anger that exists among right wing radicals is justified,
right.
right? That they are justified to feel to become radicalized. That the radicalization, which he then goes on about crime, right, which is of course Willie Horton. I mean, we've lived all this, for since the Southern strategy came upon us in the mid
Yep,
1960s, is that this sort of exploitation of racial fear, which is the central driving force of all the Republican Party domestically since the mid 1960s, is just manifests itself. And what Trump has done is that I do believe that what we're, that all of, Stephen Miller had another one of these kind of wild posts in the last few days about this dark force that's destroying the country that needs to be fought, very similar to the language that they used in this White House speech on July 4th in 2020 about sort of this mounting, conspiracy against American values. And the truth is, what's so absurd about this is that no one has been less American. No one has been less faithful to the Constitution. No one has been less faithful to the great American project than Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. And that for them to have evoked this sort of wrapping themselves in the flag and patriotism, when there's an unprecedented effort to undermine and abandon the U.S. Constitution and the global rules-based order that has created unprecedented peace and prosperity in the world over the last 80 years, right? They're doing more to undermine, a rules-based order abroad and at home than any two Americans have ever done in all of our history. And so I do think that we are at a moment. I'll just say, Edwin, that part of my takeaway from today is that I think it's been very difficult for our current set of political leaders as Democrats to really understand how to navigate in these unprecedented times. That no
yeah,
one as an American has ever lived in a period like this before. This is unprecedented in our history, and that we don't have great sort of stories and examples in history that we can draw on in order to inspire our work, right? And the only analogous story is really the founding of the country itself, when we built an entire democratic system that would be, not a system of oligarchs and monarchy, but of we the people. But I think that our leaders have struggled to understand the playing field, the battle, the battlefield that we're on now, the playing
hmm
field that we're on now, and to have created an adequate response to it. And I think that this moment has to become clarifying
hmm
for Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and for other Democratic leaders, that we're not going to be able to only engage with them on the economy and healthcare. That there
Let me
is
give
this
you.
other set of issues that we have to develop a robust and muscular conversation with the American people
I,
about.
I am more uh, optimistic about that, partly because I don't live in DC. Out in the rest of the country, Democrats, whether they're governors or state legislators, have found their voice, and and there's an experiment going on with what's the most effective way to counter this going around the country. That's why primaries are so helpful. I'm confident we will come up through this primary season and the presidential primary season with candidates who know how to who experience in campaigning will help them figure out how to counter this directly. But I see it everywhere in the country. I agree with you. Our leadership in Congress is not yet living in the era the rest of us live in. Right? This is not business as usual. And strongly worded letters are um, I was going to say, fire starters, but we don't even have fires anymore like that. They're 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 just not they're not meeting the moment for sure. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that in a different way. I don't want to be defensive at all. I think we need to go on the offense, and I mean offense both rhetorically and geographically. I just don't think anymore it's appropriate to only complain about Donald Trump. And even our anger masks something more powerful, which is our aspirations. You and I have a vision for the future of America that actually includes everybody who's here,
Yeah.
right? It is a powerful, wonderful vision that these guys hate and are afraid of. They hate it like they hate us. And I think we can beat them on values, and we can certainly beat them on, oh my God, how effective is your leadership? I mean, you pick a topic. We could talk about foreign policy, disaster, the tariffs on the economy, disaster. Americans would like to come together. They don't even try. Oh, have common decency. They're a disaster.
Yeah, look, I think, I gave a talk to my community within the last few days and wrote a piece yesterday about how our North Star through this must be democracy, rule of law, freedom, love of country, and love of one another, right?
Yeah.
And that has to be our North Star. And I wrote this, in part in response to what had happened, the terrible and tragic killing of Charlie Kirk, and that we can't lose sight that our North Star, our place that we have to go every day when we get up in the morning, right? When we try to orient ourselves in this time of incredible confusion and disinformation and just all the stuff hurtling at us every day, that, we're the warriors for, we're the proud, plucky patriots that love our country and are, expressing that love of country and our love of democracy and rule of law and freedom through all the democratic means that we've been discussing here, Edwin, right? Through
Right.
respectful debate and forging new media organizations like Hopium and the work that you do. And I know you've
Okay.
been doing a lot of work with Lincoln Square too,
Yep.
my good friends over there,
Yep.
who I often collaborate with, is that, our response has been to reinforce democracy in a time of challenge, not to undermine it. And I think this is really, really important. This is in some ways to me sort of the fundamental divide between us and them right now, which is that we're a movement that believes in we're a pro-democracy movement, and they're a movement that is advancing illiberalism and a different understanding of how we should all be organized in civil society. It's an
Mhm.
incredible betrayal of the country. And I do agree with you that part of our opportunity now. And I had on in the last few days at Hopium, I had on John Ossoff, who gave a very inspiring talk, and Ruben Gallego, who
Yep.
won a very difficult Senate race in a tough place. And I had on Rita Hart, who's the state chair of Iowa, who talked about winning in red places in red states. I do think that we have to be focused on expansion, right? They are in control of the House, the Senate. They have too many. We need to learn together how to win in more red states and red places in the coming months. Hopium is about to make a big set of investments in this. I'll be challenging my community to not only be supporting people like Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill, the people who are on the ballot in
Yep.
November, but also to really start investing money in red states and red places in a far more strategic manner than we have in the past. And to recognize that, this is hard work, but not impossible, and that we have to, and it won't happen unless we try. Right, that's the whole point. Right, unless you can't score unless you shoot, Edwin. Right, and
I
that Yeah.
Yep,
Go
yep. I
ahead.
mean,
Go
I
ahead.
love state chairs. I really do. Their job is unbelievable, and some of them do such a good job. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about going to red places, you know, up here in the Great Lakes, there was a Republican lock for a long time. Then
Yeah.
we broke the uh, uh, gerrymander in Michigan. Then we broke the gerrymander in Wisconsin. And all of that was about getting, keep turning out our votes where we had them, but making inroads in the reddest parts of those states enough to make the difference. And every cycle, I think maybe we'll get closer in Texas. Maybe we'll get closer in Florida. And you know what? We have to take one of those states off the table at some point. And I think working on that is enormously important. The work that your friend and mine, Anderson Clayton, does in North Carolina is transformative in that
Yeah.
state, in the Supreme Court races and things. We need to do more of that. What do you think about Texas and Florida?
Yeah, look, we're going to, uh, I haven't announced this yet, but I mean, we're going to be announcing an
Oh my God, I
investment.
usually make news.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's great.
an investment fund that will be initially raising money for the Florida, Texas, Iowa, Maine, and Alaska Democratic parties.
That's great.
And that will be like the work we did. We raised $1.1 million for the North Carolina Democratic Party
Yep.
last cycle. We were the largest investor. And that state, everyone should realize, is that by the way, we are getting breaking news here in this press conference that's
Uh,
happening. And while I'm talking, if you want to you
all right. I'll
scour the
take.
news, and I'll let you update
Yep.
people here,
Yep.
because we're learning more about him as a young man, Tyler Robinson, who's 22 years old, who's the one who's been arrested, taken into custody. That we're going to focus on Iowa and Alaska and Maine because these are places where we don't necessarily have a settled candidate for the Senate yet, and there may in some of these states in Iowa and Maine there's going to be multi-candidate primaries, and in Alaska we just don't have our field is set yet. But it doesn't mean we can't be supporting the party there now, getting them ready. If we want to try to flip the Senate, we're going to have to try to win in one of these places next year. So it's an ambitious, risky strategy that we'll be taking. And then we're also going to invest in Florida and Texas because in Texas, we also are going to have a multi candidate primary for the Senate now with James Tellerico getting in. And that if you look at the map, the presidential map, so those first three states are sort of Senate related in this cycle. The presidential map, because of the shift of the population in the United States, from bluer places to redder places in the next redistricting that takes place and the reapportionment after the census in 2032 or in 2030, there will be a shift of where the Republicans will pick up electoral college votes, and that will our blue wall will erode a little bit. We don't yet know the exact number, but it means that we have to put more states in play at the presidential level. That we can't be satisfied with the current battleground. And historically, the next set of states have been Florida and Texas. And these are states that are enormous. They'll be very expensive, but the family is going to have to get ready to invest hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to make these states competitive. We don't really have a choice. And the other thing that's happened, and Ruben Gallego talked about this at length in my interview with him a few days ago, that Trump has burned his bridges with the Hispanic community, and that we have through not only through his racial profiling and targeting of Hispanic families, but through the assault on healthcare and on and the tariff increases. Hispanics are the most uninsured, they gain the most from the ACA, they have the least amount of family wealth. So this kind of rising prices, assault on healthcare is also a war on Hispanic families, and that he believes we have unprecedented opportunity. And so we're going to create an expansion investment fund that we're going to be rolling out in the next few days to target these places where we simply must learn how to win in some of them. We don't have to win in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we don't try, we can't score unless you shoot. And we learned last cycle. I mean, the two major projects my community was involved in were North Carolina, which was the most successful down ballot state, below the presidential in the
Yep.
country, and then Arizona. where we were Ruben Gallego's largest donor. We went in very early there. And Ruben Gallego, just so everybody knows, I mean, Arizona was Kamala Harris did the worst of all the battleground states in Arizona, and Ruben was able to overcome that. It was an
Yeah.
extraordinary victory, and those are the places we invested. We also were very involved in flipping 7 House seats last cycle. We're some of the largest investors in the whole country in a series of House races. So we're going to take that kind of same strategy of expansion and growth and winning in the hard places towards what is open to us this cycle, which is a
Yep.
different map and different opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the growth in places like Texas and Florida is people from blue states moving for whatever reasons, but they don't leave behind who they are when they get there. And when their daughters go to those states and are told, "Please register with us so we know if you're trying to flee the state in order to have an abortion," they're going to say, "Wait a minute, we didn't sign up for this just because we moved here for a job." So I think we do have some opportunities that um, uh, to bring some sense there. And I mean, that's part of what happened in Arizona. The population changed. It wasn't the one it was 20 years ago.
Well, it
So,
changed, and Ruben Gallego, like Stacey Abrams did in
yep.
Georgia, Ruben Gallego was part of a bunch of young political activists 20 years ago, because I met
Hmm.
Ruben for the first time at an event that I presented about the Hispanic vote in Phoenix
Yep.
in 2004. Ruben and I met for the first time when he was young and just a street kid in Phoenix. There was an orchestrated effort to change the electorate in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Voter registration, just in the way that Stacey Abrams did in Georgia over a long period of time. Ruben was the leader of an effort and has now ridden that all the way to the Senate,
Yep.
all these years later. And it's been amazing for me to watch Ruben go from being an activist to a
And
state legislator to a congressman, now to a senator. And we've been friends through this whole period. But Ruben deserves a lot of credit. And I think for those of you who are watching this and who live in states that are not blue or purple and have aspiration for turning those states to become more democratic. I mean, part of what Edwin and I are talking about today is about strategy, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I was involved in creating the Hispanic strategy and the millennial strategy for the Democratic Party 20 years ago. I did the first bilingual poll of Hispanics that was ever done. I did the first poll of millennials. We took that research and argued that there was a new electorate that we could run into that would expand our coalition. And you know what happened? Right? From 1992 to 2004, Democrats, I'm now going to forget my own numbers here, but Democrats averaged 47% of the vote, I think, in those presidential elections. After identifying this new coalition of expansion of Hispanics and millennials, and we invested into it, we averaged 51% of the vote from 2008 to 2020.
Yep.
We fell down a little bit this time because, in part, that coalition unraveled for us in
Yep.
2024. But we've gone through this process as a family where we've identified demographic and geographic opportunities for us and then invested towards them, and we're very successful. We need to do that again now with a different set of maps, a different electorate, a different time, a different set of politics,
Mhm.
but with the same strategic intent, right?
We also, I think we have, um, and this is both strategy, but it also is governing. There's something we have to do to shore up the votes in the Black community. And I say that because when I go talk to um, uh, folks who live in Black neighborhoods in Chicago about what's going on, and they say, "Yeah, we see all you white guys protesting what's going on all over the country, and you don't like the fact that they're sending police to police your community. We don't like the fact you don't like the fact that you feel like your civil rights are being violated, that nobody cares about your human rights. Welcome to our world." You know, like we've lived through this for so long. There's a little bit of, let's sit back and let you guys carry this weight for a while in the Black community. And that I worry that that's, leading to some voter apathy, which I think we have to address head on by talking about policies that really will address the wealth gap, begin to um, uh, make America work for everybody in ways that it really, hasn't for a while.
Listen, there's no question. I mean, I think it's very important. I think one of the great, there are these sort of memes and sort of things that exist in our family's discourse that are unhelpful to us. And one of them is this notion of base and swing, right? Which there's a base voters and swing voters, and I have been warring against that sort of framework for over 20 years, because what we are is a coalition. And when you think of ourselves as a coalition, it means that we need to be talking to and honoring and engaging and working with all elements of the coalition, not viewing some as base, meaning you can ignore them and put all your energy into the swing, but you have to put all of your energy into everybody, right? We need everybody, rowing in the same boat together, and it's a very different kind of way of thinking about politics. And that's why in my own commentary, I talk about coalitions. I don't talk about base and
Yeah.
swing, which is in some ways creates the kind of politics that you're describing, right? Which is that we can take people for granted because we know they're going to vote for us, and we have to go out and use. And part of that, Edwin, just so you know, that comes from a period where the Democratic Party had less resources, and where the Republicans always had more money than us, and that we were less. Now, though, because of the internet and because of Act Blue and because of the passion and love of country that our grassroots, Democrats all across the country, the proud, plucky patriots that we
We're
are
competitive.
are pouring into.
Yep.
We now are in a time of abundance and not scarcity, and so some of those strategies that were built in a time of scarcity need to be, you know
Leave.
abandoned. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right, for strategies that are more consistent with the moment that we're in.
Yeah.
And I think that we are, um that, yes, you're right, there are people in our coalition who feel that we don't talk to them, or we only come to them in the last 2 weeks before an election. And that's why we have to, what central to my sort of I have a series of 7 recommendations I make to the family about things we need to get
Yep.
better at. And one of them is that we have to operate 24/7, 365. We can't view it as there's a time for governing and a time for campaigning, right? Is that we have to be communicating and talking about our values and our beliefs and our accomplishments and our aspirations every day, right? Because
Mhm.
and not govern for 18 months and then campaign for 3 months, right? That just can't be. That's also a remnant of a previous political age, right? That doesn't exist any longer. And we still are operating. Many of our leaders are still operating. And I would argue that that's part of our frustration with Chuck Schumer, right? I think
I
that,
agree with that, and I
I,
think it's partly you see it in the New York mayor's race. I mean, it just there's a sort of '90s view of triangulation that is just not. We're in a different place right now.
we're in a different place. And I think that, uh, when I founded Hopium 2.5 years ago, in my
I've only
opening.
been 2.5 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
no.
gosh.
It seems like a
I remember
decade.
I remember
I don't know.
right after,
I know.
just as you were launching.
I
Wow.
know. But I mean, the last 2.5 years feels like 10 years or
Yeah.
20 years. I don't know.
Yep. Yep.
COVID felt like 100 years. This
Yep.
feels like a long time. But one of in my opening statement about why Hopium, I was founding Hopium,
Yep.
and it was that I felt that our leaders didn't understand the nature of the conflict that we were in today, and
Mhm.
that we were operating off of kind of antiquated understandings of politics across many fronts. And that a lot of the work that I did at my old organization, NDN was like a private think tank for Democrats. We looked at strategies for how to
Yep.
grow our coalition, for how to be successful in a new media environment, how to conquer issues, that are new and emergent, and to get on the right side of them, and to understand them, and to make them, and to develop strategies for how to talk about these new emergent things. And I want to just reflect on something I wanted to say in the beginning, is that I think the last, Edwin, and I think you'll understand this, because I think JB Pritzker and the Illinois Democrats have really been exemplars. I'm in touch with Pritzker's team about him
Mhm.
coming to speak to Hopium. We're going to get that booked. I've been very proud. I've been very proud's not the right word. I've been very inspired by the kind of muscularity and forthrightness and simplicity of his language. Right. I think that what's incredible about him as a leader is that you know that what he's saying he believes and that the words are his and that it's integrated and powerful and that he's not reading a script written for him by other people. That
Mhm.
JB Pritzker has a very potent and impressive belief system that he's is grounding him this time when we're it's too easy to get blown around by the events of the day. And I just want to say that one of the areas that I have really thought about a lot over the last few days is there have been voices in our family advocating that we compromise with Trump on DEI and on crime, on the occupation of cities, on immigration. And I think that this is naive, and I think that this is naive. And I think that I one of the things that I've learned, if I can just sort of reflect on this in a messy kind of way, because I don't have this all thought out, is that, the work that I did in the Hispanic community, I think was, and I come from immigrants on all sides, and I'm a ethnic mutt, like many New Yorkers and Chicagoans, and from all over the world. And
Mhm.
my wife's family is also an ethnic mutt from all over the world. And we part of the reason I became so involved in the fight around immigration over the last 20 years was that I felt as a child, a grandson of immigrants, I felt blessed and lucky that my grandparents somehow made the decision to come here and to give me and my family the opportunity to live here as opposed to the places where they were from. And so I felt that I had to pay it forward. I mean, this was very kind of a powerful animating principle of mine. And so what I just want to say about this is that the DEI, crime, open borders, is just unadulterated racism, right? Like, we can't, in any way compromise on and sort of sugarcoat or put lipstick on the Trumpian pig on this sort of racial assault against people of lesser means and of different race, the sort of the perniciousness of white supremacy. I wrote a big magazine article in 2020, and I'll wrap this up because this is a little bit rambling. But in 2020, I was asked to write a magazine piece right before the election about my hopes for the Biden presidency. And I laid out all the things I hoped he'd do. And at the end, I said, but there's one big thing I hope he does more than anything else, which is that he needs to denounce white supremacy as a failed and absurd,
Mhm.
anachronistic faith that
Mhm.
needs to be put into the dustbin of history, for all time, and that we need to delegitimize it as a central project of the Biden
Mhm.
presidency.
Mhm.
Because the idea that when you look at China and India or Brazil, and that those are people that are somehow can't are not part of the universal human journey, and that they can't do what we can do, this whole notion that somehow white people in this world are somehow superior to all the other people of the world. Maybe, we
Sick
could have
thing.
believed that
Sick thing.
150 or 200 years ago. But
Yeah.
today it's an absurdity, right?
Yeah.
And so we have an obligation. I think that we have to understand now that one of our central collective projects, Edwin,
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
is to face white supremacy head on and defeat it. And this is something that that project has reignited in me in recent days, and it's gonna be a core part of the Hopium journey
Good.
over the coming months.
I mean, I'm so thrilled to hear that in a way. I mean, and what I tell audiences and I speak to that are white is that white supremacy isn't about you guys in this room. It is not really about white supremacy. It's about the supremacy of a handful of white billionaires. And they use this to create policies that don't help any person in this room. They don't. This is a base lie that makes people afraid of each other so that powerful people can become more powerful at everyone's expense. Everyone's expense. And God help us if we say to the black scientist who is about to give us in fact did give us the vaccine for COVID. Oh, you know what? You can't be in the lab, right? How many more
Right.
people died? I mean, my gosh, we are so much better off for for the contributions of everybody in this country, and we can't afford to put anybody on the sidelines. And no one benefits. No one benefits from this kind of thing.
Listen, I worked for Bill Clinton in 1992,
You
and
and me
I
both.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there are two just reflections I have, right? One is that he used to have this line that racism and white supremacy, in essence, kept his state dumb and poor for 100 years, right? That it was it was a, for somebody who grew up in the Acela corridor in the East Coast of the United States, working, I lived in Little Rock for 6 months,
Mhm.
being in a campaign that was so much about the emergence of the South from, he picked another Southerner to be on the ticket with him, right? About sort of the new South and emerging from, the rubble of the failed Reconstruction that we had, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Civil Rights movement, but he also, I also was at this sort of famous set of events that happened in the spring of 1992, where Clinton gave a the same speech about race in Macomb County to a white audience, and then the next day to a black audience in Northwest Detroit. And I was there for the speech in Detroit, not the Macomb County one. And
Yeah.
I was part of the team. I was the state director of Michigan in the primary in 1992, and I was part of the team that put this whole theory together that Trump
Mhm.
had to talk about overcoming our differences. I mean, Clinton had to
Clint.
talk about
Yeah.
overcoming our differences. And this the New York Times, after those two speeches, editorialized that this was the closest moment to the Robert Kennedy speech and after Martin Luther King's
Yeah.
assassination in 1968. And I was so proud to be part of that. And not everything that Clinton did was perfect, right? And he was an imperfect man, but a brilliant man, and who had extraordinary aspirations for the American people. And I do think that we are at a moment again, going back to you know, the way we started this conversation, which is, many of our, you know, is many of our brothers and sisters in our coalition feel ignored or overlooked by us. Well, these are fixable problems, right? But a lot of it comes down to, white folks got to have more courage. White folks have to buck up a little bit here and lead and not accept, what is being done in our name, by this awful man. And that, we have to fight this battle and take this on our shoulders far more aggressively. This is not just a fight for Hispanics and black people and Asian people and immigrants, but it's our fight. And because Trump has put this on the table. His remarks today to me on Fox News were a before and after moment in this evolution of our understanding of just how pure he believes that his mission, his governing project, his central governing project is now to launch a race war in the United States for white people against
Everybody.
the invaders, the unworthy, those people. He keeps saying, by the way, those people is the line, right? I know we've gone on a long time today, Edwin, and I
Well,
appreciate you letting me rant about this
no,
because
no.
I'm
I
I'm
like
I'm
that.
I'm I'm very energized and angry and
Yeah,
frustrated this
let
morning.
me bring it to a close with something else Bill Clinton said, because Donald Trump made it clear, and made it clear today, but he's made it clear every day that he has a terrible vision for our future, and his policies we now know are devastatingly bad for everybody who lives here, for the whole world. Um, uh, there's a lot wrong with our country right now, an enormous amount, and that we have a president of the United States who is a lawless um, man with the worst values and no interest in the things that has made our country great over the years. That is a terrible place to be. And the rise of political violence is terrifying. And yet, based on all the things we've talked about in this conversation, the line of Bill Clinton's that comes to me is there is nothing wrong with America that cannot be fixed by what is right with America.
Yeah, look, I think, as I have said in my own writing the last few weeks, I think that something changed in July and August in our collective understanding of Trump,
Yep.
and that we entered here in the fall with this sort of it became impossible now, I think, for reasonable people, the non-MAGA part of America, 65% of the country, whatever the number is, right? To to see Trump as doing anything other than doing enormous harm to the country.
Yeah.
And that wherever, and that we also, and that there was no longer kind of a place where you could comfort yourself to say, well, it really wasn't going to, it's not going to be this bad, or that, or that it's all going to be okay on the other end unless we sort of significantly, and I think where Democrats have to really change our strategic orientation now because of this collective and deepening understanding that he's doing ongoing material harm to the country every day, and he's breaking things that will be difficult, if not impossible, to repair. That we not only have to have this place we go that, well, he's doing all this and therefore we'll win elections.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll win elections, and that we'll be able to restore things back in 2027, but that we have to mitigate the damage he's doing now. We have to do both. And I think for too many of our leaders, there's been this sense that, well, he's fucking up and that we'll be able to clean up after 2026. We'll have a good midterm.
Yeah.
He'll be repudiated. I think that's naive. I think that sort of view is no longer available to us as a family, that we have to be doing what J.B. Pritzker and Gavin Newsom and the Texas Democrats did, which is to mitigate the damage and to fight him more forcefully. You and I, we don't know what's going to happen in Illinois, but certainly today it looks like Trump has now moved on to other areas of the country that he's going to really focus on. We don't know that, right?
We
It's
don't know
still,
that.
we don't, but for now, he's now trying to find, because it looks like there's going to be legitimate and serious opposition that he's
Yeah.
not sure, because at the end of the day, he's a coward, right? And he doesn't actually really like to fight. And so I'll just end with you is that I think the other sort of big new opening we have is to be far more ambitious about mitigating the damage. And what I have proposed at Hopium is a 4-part agenda for Democrats for the fall, because I think our political aspiration has to be to win the fall, not just win the elections, but
Mhm.
win the big debate. He's losing every debate, every major issue he's underwater on. In the last week, he's even been underwater on crime and on border security, right? Which means that he's now under 50 on literally every issue in the country. That should encourage us to be ambitious and aggressive and to go after him even harder. And so the agenda that I've laid out is a 4-part agenda. One is to roll back the tariffs that are, causing so much harm to the American people and to our economy, our standing in the world. It's
Mhm.
taxation without representation. It's illegal, unconstitutional, and we need to roll them back. Second is that we should be, um, fighting with everything we can to roll back the ICE increase and to keep troops off of our streets, and that this sort of creation of a private political police force for the president is un-American, illiberal, and we have to fight it with all the bones in our body, as you guys are doing in Chicago. Third is this assault on science and higher ed and public health, the cutting of Medicaid and ACA, is destructive. It's
Yep.
sabotage for the
Yep.
United States.
Yep.
And then finally, fourth is that, we need to be standing with Ukraine and our European allies and not with Putin, and that we need to be defending democracy here and all around the world. These are the 4 pillars of what I think could become an offensive agenda for the Democrats as we go into ideological and rhetorical battle with Trump and the right, and as a set of guideposts for how we're going to engage. And I think we're seeing progress on that. Schumer said he's going to bring the tariffs up to a vote. They're going to fight really hard to delay the Medicaid and ACA cuts, right?
Yep.
We're seeing, I'd like them to fight a little bit harder on the occupation of DC, frankly,
Yep.
given where I live. And certainly I think you're starting to see rumblings about Ukraine. So I think what my advice to all of your viewers and listeners is this, is that um, your job now as proud, plucky, patriotic Americans is to continually be talking to your political leaders about what's expected of them now,
Yep.
to encourage them to find a higher gear and to fight harder, and to call even your Democratic offices for the House and the Senate, state legislature, governor, wherever you are, to encourage them to continue to fight harder because they took an oath of office. They need to obligate it. They need to
Yep.
fight for our country and our Constitution. And part of our job is to encourage them to do so. And then when they do so, to thank them for doing so also. So
I'm
we,
gonna
yeah, we have an important role to play. Thanks, everybody.
we've run a little over time. That
I know.
alarm went off at the end of our normal. Thank you, Simon. I'm deeply appreciative of your time and of
See you.
amazing work that you've been doing and that you keep doing.
Edwin, thank you so much. And I will certainly share this with the Hopium community. And I want to thank you for your steadfast work, but also for your leadership in a time of crisis for your own community, right? And for standing strong in a time of where your community is under extraordinary threat. And so, thank you so much for that as well.
You bet. All right. Take care.
See you, everybody.
Bye.